Today I'm joined by the author, presenter, doctor, public health advocate, everything, and most importantly, CEO Sandro Demaio, Dr. Sandro Demaio. Um, Sandro is now the CEO of VicHealth with a focus around improving health systems of not just Victorians, but also all Australians through food, exercise, better policy, and any way we can make improvements. He says, while I love being a doctor and working with patients, I felt like I was at the bottom of a cliff helping people who had fallen to their peril. What I wanted to do was climb to the top of the cliff, build a fence, and try and stop people falling off to begin with. And I guess this is where your story is kind of taking you into Vic Health. Sandra, it'd be great to hear about what do you see as Vic Health kind of doing around alcohol and the role of an organization like that in supporting people with this particular challenge?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. And first of all, a massive shout out to you and an acknowledgement of the massive contribution you've made to the public health space here in Australia and internationally, and also to your organisation. I've had the pleasure of working with you for a number of years now, and I'm a big fan. So, in addition to the generous introduction you gave me, you can also add hello Sunday morning fanboy or whatever else you want to call it. But yeah, no, I mean, look, so Vic Health's the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation. We are a statutory body. I'm appointed by the Minister, and we're really lucky in Victoria to have this independent body that is able to look at the long-term health, the chronic disease burden, and the long-term health and long-term investments for health for Victorians and for Australians. And also through some of our partners like the World Health Organization and UNICEF, we help some communities around the world as well. I mean, alcohol is one of our 5 main strategic priorities. It's one of our pillars. We know the massive burden that it contributes to particularly young people, but people across society in Australia. And we know it's linked, that it has important links to so many chronic disease outcomes, from heart disease, many forms of cancer, links with mental illness, and also social inequality, and many forms of vulnerability. You guys know all of this. So for us, we really, we see it as a critical role for an agency like Vic Health. First of all, at baseline, even when we're not in the middle of a pandemic, we invest heavily in organisations like yours, other partners and organisations across the space, but we also work ourselves very actively with governments and with policymakers to try and get stronger, more progressive policy around alcohol for Australians and for Victorians. We have a team that also works on changing, for example, using all of our investments in the arts and sports space. So we're a big investor in research, in organisations like Hello Sunday Morning and other partners in the space, but we're also a big investor in sport and art from the elite level all the way to community level, and we're a big funder of community-based sport and arts. And so, we use our role also there to try and influence the massive and really underaddressed burden of alcohol consumption and risky drinking through the influence of local clubs and local arts activities, which often are very heavily linked to risky drinking behaviours and other forms of risky health behaviours, of cultures that probably encourage those types of behaviours. And so if we can use our partnerships and our funding and our long-standing relationships with those sectors to try and drive really a sustainable long-term shift in who else is funding those sorts of platforms, what that environment looks like for young people, how that shapes their culture and their understanding of health, but also health risks, and ultimately leads to better health, then we use those more indirect tools or opportunities, as well as the more direct, like investing in leading alcohol agencies, investing in driving policy and working directly with government, and of course investing in research so that we have the numbers to be able to continue to apply the pressure and to inform the public about the massive burden, the massive health burden that alcohol confers on Australia and on Victoria every year.
I want to kind of dig into your own life, Sandro, because you go online
Sure.
and you said there's so many clips of you like cooking and making food, and it looks like such a
Well, I'm at
great
home now.
yeah, a great time to be Sandro Demaio, and I think a big part of that seems to be your family heritage. You have Italian heritage in your family, and cooking and food seem to be a really important part of your life and what you believe in, and as part of a healthy diet.
Yeah.
Where do you see the role of alcohol? What does a healthy drinking culture look like? Does it exist in that, or does it not? Or what's your vision in that way?
Yeah, I suppose I have lots of different views. Cooking and cooking with alcohol, and alcohol being served with food in my family growing up. Not when I was young, but around me when I was young. Obviously there's a link between Italian culture, Italian cooking, sharing Italian food, and wine, and those, and enjoying a glass of wine. Um, then I suppose my dad was a GP and I became a doctor, and you realize, and I actually did my PhD in Mongolia, where they have more of a Russian influence on their drinking culture. And it's incredibly, I mean, they have some of the highest liver disease rates in the world because of the enormous burden of particularly vodka drinking, but very, very high levels of alcohol drinking. And I was analysing and looking at that a lot as a PhD student over 3 years being in Mongolia, and I was also working as a doctor, and working in briefly in some remote communities and in major metropolitan emergency departments. And you start to see the very negative, or the very dangerous side of alcohol. And I suppose, for me, I with my VicHealth hat on, I come back to the guidelines, the national guidelines, as I should. My time with WHO, in Geneva, again, really, you have to go back to the evidence, particularly because there is such strong evidence around alcohol and cancer risk, even breast cancer risk, which a lot of people don't realise. Alcohol and weight gain, and the enormous number of calories in alcohol, which a lot of people don't realise. But I think at the same time, you have to balance that with where society is at, and be realistic, and also be sensitive to the current very strong cultural elements that alcohol have in many cultures around the world. And so, for me, the message is less is more in general. That's the kind of, I suppose, take home that I would use with patients. Try to, have most days alcohol free. But I drink alcohol. I mean, I have a glass of wine. I enjoy a glass of wine. My parents even, in fact, grow grapes, and supply vineyards on the peninsula with their grapes. So, I'm certainly not, I'm certainly understanding that alcohol has a place in the lives of many Australians, and is a very dear and kind of loved part of the culture for many Australians. But I do think that that's a construct that's largely been created by industry, and certainly has been hugely fueled and exacerbated by industry. And we have some work to do to, I think, bring the consumption of and the culture around alcohol back to a more healthy place for Australians.
Have you seen that anywhere in the world? As a vision?
I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, look, there are, I mean, at least 1 billion people on the planet that, for religious reasons, don't drink at all. And that would be the extreme, or not the extreme, but I suppose the most obvious example. I think, no, I mean, even in the Nordic states where I lived. So in the Nordic states, I lived in Denmark for 3 years, and Norway for 1.5 years. And In both of those countries, they have basically zero, or in Norway, they have no advertising of alcohol whatsoever. You can only buy alcohol at basically what they call vinmonopolets, which are basically like monopoly stores that only sell alcohol, and they're run by governments. So it's heavily regulated pricing. And at the end of the day, any profit that is made goes into the government revenue to offset the huge costs associated with alcohol consumption across society, which is an interesting model. But even within Denmark, even within the Nordic states, it's quite different. Denmark is a huge producer of beer, and so they have very different laws around some types of alcohol than Norway has, because it doesn't have an industry. So what I suppose I realized was that it's probably the political economy of alcohol is very complex. It generally the culture of a country is probably a mix of the long-standing culture, but to be realistic, it's also a mix of the industry incentives and what that country produces. And you see that with France protecting its wine consumption because they're big wine producers. Australia is the same. And so that complexity does play into policy, and of course then policy has a huge influence on culture.
And this experience of isolation for a lot of our members, it's either led people to either go back to drinking and to deal with the stress of that, or people that have come to us because they're realizing they're drinking much more than they normally would. And it's a stressful situation for many people. How have you found it personally? You've kind of taken on this really major role quite recently. And so I imagine that's quite stressful, and paint a picture of your experience and the kind of stresses that you're experiencing and how you're coping with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, so I am 6 months into a new job and 6 months into moving back to Australia after 10 years living overseas. My partner is also a doctor, and she's working on the front line as a clinician. We're both fairly isolated from our families because of the increased risk we both have of being exposed to the virus, because we're still having to leave our homes to go. For me, it's going into the Department of Health regularly, because I'm also now doing a couple of days a week on secondment into the COVID command, as well as then other things that I need to do for VicHealth, for my VicHealth role. So it is definitely isolating. It's lonely at times. I think it puts a huge amount of pressure on on everyone. If you've got kids, or if you're living alone, or if you're in a relationship, it has pressure on you in different ways. And we've definitely seen this as well. You trying to maintain or trying to take care of your mental and physical health when your world has been pretty much turned upside down is really tough. And so, what I've been trying to do is, be really cognizant of, particularly, of maintaining a routine. I think routine is probably the single most important thing, particularly for a character like me who likes to have a sense of control. But I think most people like to have a sense of control in their lives. And when you don't have any control over, your job, whether you can go outside, whether you can go for a walk, whether you even know if someone, if you have the virus or if someone else, I mean, that's an incredible loss of control over your life. And for most of us, that's very, very tough. But one way of, I think, maintaining a sense of control is to have a routine, and to maintain a routine, and not just maintain a routine, but also maintain a rhythm. And so what I mean is to have across the day, I wake up, I go for a run every morning. I didn't used to do that, but for me, going for a run, getting some fresh air, kind of getting the blood pumping, and just kicking the day off is really important. Of course, I have a cup of coffee or two first. And then I'll come back. I have three meals a day, like I would usually. I try not to have, no meals or snack all day, although it's not easy, I have to admit. On that front, I find that having a big bowl of fruit that is right in front of me on the kitchen bench, I'm a fairly simple human. I will eat what I see. So if fruit is there, I eat it, and most of us the same. If I've got a big bottle of water, that refillable bottle of water, I will sip on it all day, and rather than going for other things. And I just don't have those unhealthy, when I go to the supermarket, I know that if I have chips in the house, they will get eaten. So, if I'm going to have them, I have one pack, but try not to buy too much or any, and just keep them out of the house. Again, I'm human. We're all human. So maintaining that rhythm, that routine of 3 meals, trying to make sure across the day that I still take breaks and walk around, that I pick up the phone and call a friend, or have a Zoom call, or check in on a buddy in Sydney who's running an awesome foundation. And then, so that's kind of the routine. So there's a regularity, even if the days all seem to blend into one, at least you feel like you've accomplished something. You kind of know how the day is structured, what's coming next, and you've got a sense of control. And then across the week or the month, you create a rhythm. You create maybe I don't drink during the week, but I have a glass of wine on a weekend, or I don't, we try not to eat meat during the week, but we eat it on the weekend when we enjoy it more. In a similar way, when we're stuck inside, even though all the days seem to blend into one, by having a rhythm across the week where you know that, like, on a Tuesday you might call a certain friend, or on a Thursday you might have a Zoom dinner with your parents or with a loved one. This again kind of gives you a feeling of control, which is just so important across the week. I think the other thing is just to stay connected. The boredom of the TikTok meme of bored in the house and in the house bored, that has resonated very, very strongly, I think, for many of us. So I've been using the time to call friends and stay connected, but I've also been calling friends and doing activities. So my buddy in Denmark's been teaching me a bit about bread making and coffee, which has been awesome. I've been doing a bit of slow cooking because I've got the time and I'm in the house. So I've been slow cooking and comparing notes with other people who are doing the same and sharing recipes. So I suppose these are all ways that, for me, it's made the period a bit easier. But acknowledging, I think it's really important to acknowledge that it is a tough time, and that if people are finding it tough, that's normal and it's okay, and cut yourself some slack, because this is a very difficult period.
Some great advice. Sandro, thank you so much for sharing it with myself and our community. And
You're very welcome.
All the best.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.